it's incredible how many things this simple product impacts. It is not only the reduction of carbon emissions, it is saving of energy sources, but it's also empowering people by reinvesting that energy and time that they would have spent cooking into something else, into entrepreneurial ventures.
I've created a dual business model where everybody earns money, everybody impacts somebody else, and it is a business model that's sustainable.
Hey everybody, this is Scott Kearney, the CEO and founder of PositiveEarth.com. We are essentially looking to connect sustainable startups with the resources necessary to scale.
Sarah, welcome to the Be Different show, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Sarah, you are quite an experienced entrepreneur, and I would love to hear how your journey has started.
Well, thank you for having me, Scott. I feel very privileged to be part of this. So it would be really hard to tell my entrepreneurial journey if I didn't tell a little bit about my upbringing, because I think that there's a lot of debate whether entrepreneurs are born or are made. I'm not sure the answer to that, but what I can tell you is that I grew up in a very entrepreneurial home, but I also was born in the late 60s into apartheid South Africa. And so growing up in the 70s in South Africa, where there was so much divide and trauma, and from a very young age, I started to feel that deep inequality, and it created an inadequacy within myself that I didn't know where I belonged. And I found it extremely strange that the people who were the closest to me, which were my caregivers, were treated differently, and their children weren't allowed to come on holidays with us. In those days, I was called a freedom fighter, but from as young as I can remember, I was challenging the status quo, and it created a young woman who was doggedly determined to change the status quo, and it created a burning desire to, I suppose, look at how I could make the world a better place than the world that I was born into.
That status quo that challenged you internally so much.
It was such a troubled time in South Africa, but also it was a deeply Victorian upbringing that some of us on the farms had. I think our parents and the generations that were the adults of the time were also living in very traumatized times. So I think it probably lent itself to very unsafe homes. And something in me really wanted to find safety in the world. And I think it was that equalizing the status quo and living in a safe world was what was ingrained in me. That really forms the basis of how my life has transpired. And that sounds so glamorous and gracious, and it's not. I've never really had a job. I think I'm pretty unemployable. And after I finished studying, I've always done entrepreneurial businesses, and they've all been very much rooted in the empowerment and trying to see how we could economically enable freedom and dignity to women who ran the homes of Africa. So it's against that backdrop that the deep roots of entrepreneurship and also growing up, Africa is a continent of entrepreneurs. So we've hustled all our lives, as have all those around us. And I think that's from where it comes, I think.
There's some interesting challenges that you mentioned there. And I think that at the fundamental core of it is security and safety. And something that I feel entrepreneurship can really bridge the gap in giving people that safety and security to be able to take care of themselves, to create their own microeconomy. But you mentioned also empowering people, and I think this is a good pivot into what Wonderbag is all about. Tell us a bit about that. Where did you get the idea for Wonderbag from?
So before we pivot into that, you know, safety and a safe world and security is an incredibly important topic that we have to keep as part of the narrative and as part of our actions as we move forward and look at what is an entrepreneur, and when I talk about what does leadership in the future look like, because I think that's what COVID and what we have come to feel so deeply is that sense of insecurity. There was an illusion of safety in the world, but actually it was just an illusion. And safety is a really interesting thing. So yes, the hearth of the home, where food that nourishes people, where women, 89% of women in Africa spend their time is in the kitchen cooking, which is the heart of the home. And if people are not enabled and able to provide from that heart, it creates such incredible discourse, poverty, heightened abuse, war, you know, go on and on.
It's also a sense of community starts in the kitchen, right?
Well, it is. And if you can create an environment where people actually are able to share a meal and even have a meal, and people are able to come back to a hot meal, you are transforming that home. For people to understand that is hard. But if you think about it yourself, or anybody listening to this, is if people can have something to eat and something that is warm, no matter what it is, there's a sense of well-being. It gives them a sense of safety within themselves, and then that will ripple out. And that starts from children, you know, right through to the elderly. So that safety of food in your tummy is incredible. But that's not actually why I started the Wonderbag. I mean, yes, it is. It plays a lot into it. But you know, I have been working in conservation and communities within sub-Saharan Africa since I was 22. And I've been looking at what the challenges are. And the biggest challenge that faces our world, even with COVID, even with climate change, even with everything, is still that half of humanity eat off open fires. And if that challenge is not solved or it is not improved, we are going to stay in dire inequality. Climate is going to disintegrate, and you know, it just leads to a whole host. 7 million people die annually from indoor air pollution related diseases, and 50% of the children under the age of 5. So I had done other things before, which were incredibly rewarding and very purposeful, but I wasn't hitting the target. And, you know, as an entrepreneur, and if I'm going to go, I'm going to go big. I got to the point where I'd lost all fear, because I had come to the point where either I was going to solve one of the biggest problems in the world, or I was going to go and ride my horses and grow vegetables and make jam. The turning point for me grappling with this was when South Africa in 2008 had rolling blackouts. And even though I'd lived in a tent in the Okavango for 10 years and was used to no power and have spent a lot of my life in rural Africa, it was actually in Johannesburg with those rolling blackouts and working in communities that were also being impacted by that. And I just had this fierce, I don't know what it was, determination. And before I knew it, I remembered my grandmother used to have a box, and it was filled with cushions. And the person who cooked on the farm would take the food off the Aga and put it into the box. And so I thought, that's a bloody simple thing. And so I woke up, and I had a friend living with me, and I said to him, because I can't really cook, even though People think I'm a chef. And I said to him, listen, can we make a curry? He said, it's 2:00 in the morning. I said, so what? And so I asked him to bring a curry to the boil, a chicken curry, and we put it on the sofa and covered it in cushions. And he thought I was finally
Lost the plot.
institutionability. Yeah. And in the morning we woke up and it was cooked. And we had chicken curry for breakfast. Do you know, Scott, I don't know why, but I knew in my heart that day, that instant that I tasted that meal, that my life would never be the same again. And so that's
I just got goosebumps. I know what that feels like. And I guess that's where your purpose meets your passion.
I'd been looking for faith and passion and purpose, and I thought I was living a really purposeful life on everything I'd done, but I had never known what this was.
What does that feel like? What is this when you've reached this, epiphany? What does it do for you in your life and your ability to execute on this, I would say, incredible big vision for Wonderbag? Talk to us a bit about the vision for Wonderbag. Where are you taking this?
Well, I'll talk about the feeling first, because I think it's really, and it's interesting because it's the first time I've ever talked about this or shared it, but it suddenly felt like peace had come over me and I didn't need to search anymore, because I knew in my heart, in my being, that this was it. And there was no question, like I just knew.
No doubt.
And there was absolutely no doubt in my mind. And I can tell you that every single person that I shared my vision, which was to have 100 million Wonderbags, but I didn't know they were called Wonderbags then. But in my mind, before I voiced it, was to have a heap, sort of like this box, which actually in the 70s was called a Wonder Box. And it was started by Bridget Oppenheimer and various other women for peace. So that's where my grandmother obviously had got it. And so in my mind, I knew that every home had to have one. And I just knew. So it's just a knowing. And now I often ask people, how do you know that that's the right person to marry? Because I didn't get married right. I did it for 6 weeks. Didn't suit me. So, people say like, you just know. And I just knew. And and so many people said to me, oh, Sarah, how many things do we have to have? I've done earthworm farms, vegetable gardens. I mean, every single economic empowerment thing I could think of, I had done, and I had taken to all my friends, and they were like, I think our gardener doesn't need any more stuff from you, Sarah. And I said, but this is different. And they said, but how can I be different? Everybody's skeptical. So when you're talking to investors and actually getting serious about this, and they, everybody said it would fail. They said it's a gimmick. They didn't understand the challenge the world's facing. I had an instinctive, grounded understanding of what I was doing, because I come from that world of, refugee camps and from the earth in rural Africa. But people could see I was passionate about it, and everybody knew that. I think what that feeling did for me was it gave me a pain threshold to withstand the pain of the entrepreneurial journey. And if there's anything that I'm grateful for, is that feeling, because there's never been any doubt in my mind. And no matter how tough, and it's been an incredibly tough, as you all know, Scott, is that, it's like jumping out of a plane without a parachute, and you build it as you're falling. You just have no idea what you're doing. And I think that's a gift too, because if you did know, you probably wouldn't start.
I want to understand, Sarah. So there's obviously this massive passion. You had this realization, you understood this is going to be impactful. What is that impact that Wonderbag's having on the communities that you're serving?
So I think it's important also to explain how a Wonderbag works. In fact, I've got one
Please.
behind me, and I can just
Amazing.
show you that. So it's really looks, if you can see it there, it looks like a giant pumpkin. And you use a saucepan and you bring your food to the boil as you normally would. And when the recipe says turn it to simmer, instead of leaving it on the stove, you would put it into the Wonderbag, close the Wonderbag, and leave it to slow cook. Or not slow cook, actually, you leave it to cook. That was the great thing. Once I got a box and cushions into 500 homes of grandmothers that I already was working with, and I saw the economic impact. What I saw in those first 3 months was I saw children getting back into school. I saw the economic shift in those homes. I also, the biggest trigger for me was seeing women become entrepreneurs. And even though they may have been having a side hustle of selling some, airtime on the side, or whether it was some food at the taxi rank or whatever it was, suddenly those homes changed fundamentally because there was more money in the house, there was savings on electricity or firewood or whatever fuel source they were using. And also it created, so there was saving of money up to 300 to 400 Rand a month. In dollars, that's $15, $20 a month. And that's a lot of money. And that money was then able to be paid for other things and create that safety that I'm talking about of food security. And then the businesses of the woman, and every African woman every woman actually in the world, I believe, is an entrepreneur. Because they had more time, because they weren't spending 5 hours trying to collect firewood or hustling to get paraffin, that time was put into growing their businesses. And I saw these tiny little stalls on the side of the road grow to little spaza shops. And the girls that were collecting the firewood were only going to school like 2 days a week because they had to collect firewood the other days.
All the chores and things that they had to do.
Yeah, and it's always the boys that have the preference to go to school. And having grown up in a patriarchal home myself, that was my dogged determination that girls were going to live a different life. It was a big thing for me. So getting kids into school and just seeing those fundamental shifts, I knew that feeling I was describing earlier was valid.
It's incredible how many things this simple product impacts. It is not only the reduction of carbon emissions, it is saving of energy sources, but it's also empowering people by reinvesting that energy and time that they would have spent cooking into something else, into entrepreneurial ventures. And something that you said stood out for me is that you said that every woman, you believe that every woman is an entrepreneur. I'd love to double click on that and for you to tell us what you mean by that.
So I don't know if you've ever taken a road trip through anywhere in Africa. People are selling things everywhere, and it's predominantly women. I believe the true entrepreneurs of Africa are the women, the economic stronghold of the community. And so we see things like stock files and community banks that arise to enable women to be able to have the cash flow that they need to run the businesses that sustain our continent. I've seen it in India, I've seen it in Asia, I've seen it everywhere. It's not just Africa, but there are challenges. So I'm not saying that Wonderbag is the only thing that's going to support an entrepreneur, but it's the key to the door. And a woman just needs the key. She can fit it into the door, open the door, and make shit happen. Women of the world have dignity and they want free choice. And I think the narrative of the majority world has always been, we want everything free from the West. That is so not true. People want to purchase something. So my biggest business challenge was, how do I get them back to the people that need it the most at a price they can afford? Because free is not what people want. That is disempowering. And I'm saying that as an African woman who speaks Zulu as my first language. I know that people would prefer to pay for it, but it needs to be affordable. I believe it's a human right to cook. I believe it's a human right to eat. And I think it's a human right to purchase what you want. And as business leaders and as big FMCGs around the world, I think our challenge is to get the right things to the right people at the right price. And I believe that globally we can do that. And I think that that is something that I would really like to see emerging as we find our way into a new dawn.
I think to a certain extent, the commercialization of these solutions creates sustainability in its own right, because it's not a linear flow of wealth and security. There is a price attached to it so that they don't feel disempowered by the process, but they can also use that to generate their own income. They could cook for other families. They can take over all kinds of other tasks and generate income for themselves.
Well, you know, there's this buzzword that's going around called the circular economy and social entrepreneurial or impact investing. And they all create their own connotations, and one can become skeptical of all of them. I kind of created my own language because, as you probably have noticed, I'm not very keen on being put in a box. And
there's nothing wrong with that. Also not in a bag. Food belongs in a box or a bag. We don't.
No, it is the crazy ones. But so just to get back to the very significant thing of what you said about commercialization. So I think if we look at the world as it is, or as it was, can I say, where you had aid, where people, you know, aid was the PR machine. It was the way the Western world was to keep people in poverty. I mean, Africa, India, Asia is strewn with people coming in, promising projects, doing a pilot and leaving. And it has caused more damage than anything. And so we have to look at a business model that works for everybody, for all players. So, you know, I've created a dual business model where everybody earns money, everybody impacts somebody else, and it is a business model that's sustainable, because there's no point in running a business like mine if it isn't going to grow. So when you look at how do you scale a business, how do you grow a business, and in this environment where it's a humanitarian business that meets a truly commercial business. So it's that matching. But within that circle is the whole supply chain, because you've got the recipients who are benefiting with the impacts, whether it's fuel, money, and more time, getting back into school, etc., saving water. Then you've got the manufacturing of the Wonderbags, which we do in communities, and we work with people. We don't open our own factories. We actually go in and support people who've got their own sewing machines. And so we manufacture in different parts of Africa, right where the bags are needed.
So reducing the need for logistics, right?
So then we also have to collect the data. So there's a whole digital democratization that's taking place. And so we are training and working with people in a totally holistic way. And the solutions, and this is, I think, a very important point, is that this is a culturally relevant solution to cultures across the world. And as you point out, I'm very lucky and fortunate to have a product that is so magical, that works in a Manhattan apartment where people are busy and people are moving away from fast food. They want to eat organic whole food, but they don't have space. You can just stick it in a Wonderbag and put it under a table. To a mud hut in Mali, it's used across Europe. Some of the smartest restaurants are using them, and across South America, everywhere. It's its own niche in every single market. And I think that's why we create our business models around those markets as well, is what works. Is it online? Is it community driven? How do we collect data? Is it on USSD? Is it on an app that we've developed? Is it a combination of both? So we are very nimble, and I love working with the new generations because they think differently. And so I throw them into the deep end and say, figure it out. I'm taking young people out of university, first, second year, out of university, and saying, you guys have the solution. It's your futures. Let's figure this thing out together. And it's so exciting to see that come alive. And I would really love to see that kind of collaboration between generations, cultures, and corporations to say, how do we do this collectively for the environment?
And various communities.
And at the end of the day, make it sustainable for all.
Sarah, that is amazing. And I think that is why the product is truly called the Wonderbag, because it has so many different benefits, so many cross-cultural applications as well. The one thing I want to end on is, what would you say is the greatest lesson that you've learned that you think other entrepreneurs should know?
Be flexible. Don't be connected to an outcome, because you don't know what that business model is going to end up. So you have to be able to pivot. I've had to do 3 or 4 pivots in the last 14 years because markets change, times change, economies change, and you have to be nimble and you've got to be brave. And the other big lesson is, don't take on debt in the beginning. Grow organically. And I know that's really hard when people are excited about something and an investor comes and throws money your way and you think, wow, if I've got that money. Money isn't what makes it successful. It's the ability to stick to your core mission with being flexible in the face of adversity.
Resilience.
Resilient communities, that's what we're about.
I think that definitely will count to our benefit in the years to come.
Skulk, I'm so optimistic about the world that we are moving into. I hope that people like you and I can continue to have these conversations. And if there's one simple thing that I would like to leave behind from my journey, is a roadmap that others can follow, because starting businesses is lonely, it's hard, and I think that the more of us that share that openly and make our journeys and our business models open sourced, I think it will really help enable the world to springboard into the next stage of where we're going.
Absolutely. Sarah, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That was wonderful to have you on the show, and I look forward to connecting with you again.
Brilliant. Skulk, thank you so much. Have a good
Thanks,
weekend.
Sarah. Thanks so much. Have a lovely weekend. Cheers.
You too.
To join the sustainability startup movement and to connect with founders, investors, and other activists, head over to positiveearth.com and sign up to the latest news on how sustainable startups are changing the world.